Alright, here's the video I talked to you about. As you're going through like roots of polynomial functions, and I believe ultimately we had problems with foiling. I'd like to go through that and kind of talk about it. Now, FOIL is just initials that stand for first, outer, inner, last. So first, outside, inside, and last. Okay, FOIL. And what that means is if I have two equations or two roots and I'm multiplying them together, so I have x plus 5 and x minus 2. The first numbers are the first ones you multiply. So f first. So there's an x here and an x here, and those you multiply together first, and you get x squared. The next one are outside numbers. So outside would be the x and the negative 2. Those are the outside of the 2. And so I would have minus 2x. And then the next thing you go to are the inside, so the I. So we did our first outside, so our next is the inside. And 5 times x is 5x. And I'm just putting that underneath the negative 2 so I can add them together just fine because they both have an x. And then finally, a 5 times a negative 2. And that would give us negative 10. And that would be the last. Okay, the 5 and the 2. And so now we just simply add these together and we get x squared plus 3x minus 10. And that's how you go from having roots, so the roots here would be the negative 5 and the positive 2, to having the actual equation. Okay, and so that's saying, okay, this equation has roots of negative 5 and positive 2. Those are the roots, or the factors down there. So if we look at like number 1 on roots of polynomial functions, we say, okay, write the polynomial function of the smallest degree that has roots of negative 5, 1, and 2. So we know it has to have negative 5, so that would be plus 5. And the reason why that's plus 5 is because negative 5 plus 5 is 0. And the goal is to always get that equal to 0. And so now if we have a positive 1, that would mean x minus 1 and 2. So we have x minus 2. Now we've got to go through and solve those. Or put them together, excuse me. We know that the lead coefficient is 1. So let's go through and find out what we can do. I chose x because p of x. So let's start the first one. We have x plus 5 times x minus 1. And we remember FOIL. So first times first is x times x, which is x squared. Outer times outer, x times negative 1 is negative x. Inner, 5 times x is plus 5x. And 5 times negative 1 is minus 5. When we combine those, add them together, we get x squared plus 4x minus 5. Okay, and then we're not done yet because we still have that last number right there, x minus 2. And we need to remember that we've got to plug that in as well. So now x minus 2. Now when we have that, we say, okay, we can't really do the FOIL method, but it's still the same basic thing. first one times the first one, you get x cubed, because x squared times x is x cubed. Now, the first one times the last one, and that's minus 2x squared. Now you do the middle one. X times 4x is minus 4x squared. And I just line up like numbers so that they're easy to add together, but you don't have to. And then 4x times negative 2 is minus 8x. Okay, now the last one. Negative 5 times x is minus 5x. And negative 5 times negative 2 is positive 10. Now we add them together. X cubed plus nothing is x cubed. Negative 2x plus a negative 4x. Oh, excuse me, that's a positive 4x squared. Not negative, excuse me. See how that's a positive and that's a positive, so positive 4x squared. We get positive 2x squared. And then negative 8x and negative 5x is negative 13x plus 10. Now, did we get all the rules? Well, the leading coefficient has to be 1. And we see here the leading coefficient is a 1, 1x cubed. So that is the answer to number 1. Okay? And that's all you have to do. So let's look at another one. Write a polynomial function of the smallest degree that has roots of negative 3 and 4. Okay, so if we have negative 3, so that would become x plus 3 and x minus 4, because we do the opposite to make sure they stay equal to 0. Minus 4, because positive 4 and negative 4 equals 0. Let's go ahead and multiply those together. We have first and first, so x and x. Okay, there we go. We have x times x, and that gives us x squared. And we have x times negative 4, so minus 4x. Then our inside, 3 times x is 3x. And then we have 3 times negative 4 is minus 12. And we're left with x squared minus x minus 12. Okay? Now, we're not done just yet, because we're also told that p of 0 equals 24. All right. That tells us that when we plug in 0 to these x's right there, that the answer is going to equal 0. Or, excuse me, 24. So let's try it. Let's plug in p of 0 equals, so what's that? That we'll plug in a 0 for that. We get x squared, or 0 squared, minus, we'll plug in a 0 there, minus 12. Okay, so that's what we're plugging in, because we're told that will equal 24. Now what's 0 squared? 0 squared is 0, minus 0, minus 12, okay, is 24. So we know that there's got to be something right here that we've got to change, because that won't work. 24, negative 12 does not equal 24. So now we got to say, okay, we've got to change that a little bit. Okay, same thing. We're told that, something, we're going to say k, times x, or excuse me, 0 squared minus 0 minus 12 is going to give us 24. All right, well, let's go through and solve it. Okay, because we're just multiplying k times, it's actually times the first number here. But I'm it's the whole thing. We're just going to multiply the whole thing times k. And we're going to say, all right, k times 0, 0, 0. And we're left with k times negative 12 equals 24. We're going to divide by negative 12. Divide by negative 12. We're left with k equals negative 2. Excuse me, k, not x. Okay? Now we know what k is. With that information, we can now plug everything in and get the final thing. We know that we have negative 2 times this times that. Okay? Because k is our first number, and we found that in order for k to work, we were looking up the p sub 0. In order for that to work, k had to be a negative 2. That's the number in front that multiplies the whole thing. So all we're doing is we're plugging that in and saying, okay, here's our negative 2 times the whole thing. And we have x plus 3 and x minus 4. Now, let's go ahead and multiply it out. Okay, we can do one of two ways. We can just multiply it out, or we can multiply it here. I'm going to FOIL first, and I get x squared plus 3x minus 4x, because we've done this before, and we're going to get the same answer. Okay, and minus 12. So now we have negative 2 times, and what do we have here? We have x squared minus x minus 12. Same thing we got earlier. Now we've got the k in front. We got a multiplier up front to change the lead coefficient, because the equation told us it had a lead coefficient of k. We didn't know what it was, so that's the same thing as just putting a k right on front. Okay. All right, so now we have negative 2 times x squared. We get negative 2x squared. Negative 2 times x, negative x is positive 2x. Negative 2 times negative 12 is a positive 24. That's the answer for number 2. And that's how you go through doing this. You just do it piece by piece, okay? And try to find find out what information is already given. If we look at number 3, determine if that is a factor of this. Well, there's lots of different ways to do it, but the fact of the matter is if this is a factor, then that means that negative 3 needs to be an answer for that. Okay, we need to have negative 3. Or we can divide it out. Or we can find the factors of this. I mean, there's lots of different ways to figure this out. And we need to decide which one works best for us. Okay? Let's go ahead and go through and figure out how to do this. So we know that this is a factor. That's going to be our easiest, or we're trying to find out if it is a factor. That's going to be our easiest route, is to say, all right, anytime you have a factor, it's got to be equal to 0. So that means if I plug in a negative 3 to all the x's, and then minus 9, that has to be equal to 0. Is that the case? Well, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. 9 times 4, let's see, that's to the 4th power, so I'm just going to use a calculator on that one. Make sure I get it right the first time. Negative 3 raised to the 4th power is negative 81. So we have negative 81, and negative 3 raised to the 3rd power is negative 27 times 2 is negative 54, and then minus 9. And if we go through and simplify all of those, we're we're going to see that it's not going to work. It's not going to equal 0. So when it doesn't equal 0, then it is not a factor. So the answer is no, because it does not equal 0. Okay, and that's justifying your answer. That's how we go through it. Okay, if if we plug in the -3. Now, what does it equal? Well, let's just do the whole thing on the calculator. We have -3 raised to the 4th power plus 2 times -3 raised to the 3rd power minus 9. And we see that once we do all the math, everything all together, we get 18. Does 18 equal 0? No. So that's your justify. 18 does not equal 0. Okay? That's how you go through this. And I hope this helps. I'm going to include a few links and talk about FOIL. But I hope this gives you an idea. Remember, when you're dealing with equations, you have k is your lead coefficient times whatever's in here. So like x squared minus 4x plus 7. So that's your coefficient. When they talk about your lead coefficient is 1 or your lead coefficient is k or whatever it is, that's what you need to find. When you find the factors, factors have to set the whole thing equal to 0. So look for that. I hope this helps a little. And the other videos I send, if it doesn't, let me know and I will send you something else.